Okay, and now I want to talk about groundwater pollution. Um, there's a bunch of ways that groundwater gets polluted. And as an interesting detail, I need you to know that the ground is a good way to treat water, meaning the earth itself can remove a lot of pollution before it reaches groundwater, especially if there's a lot. Right? So if there's like biological activity, that can bioremedy stuff, uptake of nutrients, competition against microbes. If there's a lot of sand, then you can get a little bit of reactivity so that like acids and bases might neutralize before it reaches groundwater. Um, Stuff gets filtered out. But what's really scary is when you have groundwater contamination because it's really close to the surface. Places where the aquifer is near the surface, that's much easier to contaminate groundwater because there's not enough filter in the way, so to speak. I've made a list for you of the 6 main types of groundwater pollution. Gasoline and chemical storage tanks, that's the #1 in the United States. Gasoline is very common in groundwater. We made a mix. We add something to gasoline, which makes cars more efficient. But by the way, that additive eats concrete, and most gasoline storage is made of concrete. Sometimes people will put stuff into rusty barrels and the rusty barrels will break. Old garbage dumps might not have been correctly lined. So some of you know that Elings used to be a trash dump, and that was an old trash dump before modern liners. So all the trash that's underneath Elings is seeping into the ocean near the pit. That's why the pit has the worst water quality in Santa Barbara. It's mostly the stuff that's draining into groundwater and flowing out to the ocean at Elings Park. Think of all the stuff that goes into a landfill, especially into an old landfill before we had modern waste disposal. #3, agriculture puts a lot of stuff into groundwater, nitrates being the important one, because we do a lot of liquid nitrogen fertilizer. And so nitrates dissolve, I mean, also phosphates, but nitrates are the big one. Fertilizer can get into groundwater. And then when that groundwater comes to the surface somewhere, you can imagine that's a eutrophication potential. You can eutrify groundwater. For #3 there on the list, you can have eutrophication in groundwater. #4, it's rare, but it happens that bacteria or viruses from feedlots can get into groundwater. Also pretty rare, but broken or faulty septic tanks. And so this happened in Fresno a couple of years ago. People were running sprinklers with groundwater that was polluted by a neighboring slaughterhouse. And so there was all these cows outside that were pooping a bunch, and like cow poop slurry was like soaking into the groundwater, and people were sprinkling that onto lettuce, and everybody bought bag lettuce. I don't know if you remember this, like it actually happens fairly often that there will be like lettuce recalls, like bag salad mix at Costco or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why they could recall that lettuce, but one of these a few years ago was traced back to one of these relatively rare events of microbial contamination from feedlots being reused in groundwater to irrigate food. We don't do this very much, but in places with a lot of snow, they sprinkle salt on the roads, to keep the ice from forming on the asphalt, and that salt can seep into groundwater. This affects salinization of farmland. Remember that fracking fluid can reach groundwater. It's rare for that to happen from the fracking itself because that's in a different part of the ground, but it is possible for disposal, to reach groundwater, for surface fracking fluid ponds to soak into groundwater, and for fracking fluid to leak out of the pipes to enter groundwater. Remember that once groundwater is polluted, that can go to surface water like you see in this river, or that can go to municipal water supplies like you see underneath those houses. See those little arrows? And like I said, it's possible for drain fields or leach fields to contaminate groundwater, but you'll notice in this diagram, that's because the groundwater is very close to the drain field or the leach field. Now, what's interesting is you can clean groundwater pollution. Like gasoline is lighter than water, so it floats. So what you can do is you can use water wells to pull out water, right? So that the aquifer is like this. Remember we talked about that, a cone of depression, that you can lower the water table, right? So you can use water wells to dewater the aquifer. That makes a cone of depression, and the gasoline pollution will float on that because it's lighter than water. So then you use a slightly shallower well, and that shallower one just gets the gasoline above the water. It's kind of neat. This is how you remove gasoline pollution from groundwater, and this happens a lot. Almost every gas station in the United States has leaked because they were previously built with concrete, and ethanol eats concrete, gasoline pollution. You can target pollution at specific depths. So some stuff is heavier than water, and you can put your extraction wells down below. And you know what's interesting? Because there's like a flow of, remember that groundwater is moving, right? So you can like chase pollution between wells. I'm serious, people do all this fascinating stuff. It's kind of high dollar engineering. Like you can inject air or inject gases to force migration of the polluted plume. So like the pollution was made over here, so we inject water behind it to force that dirty water, and then you remove it all in another place until your groundwater supply is clean. It's fascinating how people do all this. But anyway, I wanted to tell you about groundwater pollution and also how it can be removed, a variety of wells that either go in different places or at different depths. Okay, I'm going to make another break.